Those of you who traveled far enough into my backlog may remember me getting all gushy for the original Resident Evil Revelations. At the time, I said it was a perfect compromise between the fans of the original survival horror titles and the newer, more action-based third-person shooters. So the question is, can the second Revelations capitalize on what was essentially a peace treaty between two wildly different styles of gameplay? Can it once again bring together a segmented fan base that has formed around this iconic series? No, probably not. I'm Jared, and this is Avalanche Reviews.
Hey, Claire! Moira.
In an unsurprising turn of events, Revelations 2 follows the events of its predecessor and is technically set smack dab in the middle of RE5 and 6. Starting up the game will see you once again in the shoes of Claire Redfield, who now works for an anti-bioterror agency named TerraSave, which is a questionable choice given the track record these types of agencies have for becoming corrupt and causing more damage than they prevent. Pattern recognition apparently being the first thing to go after the mind copes with a world where the dead can rise from the grave. Throwing common sense to the wind, Moira Burton of the Jill Sandwich Burtons decides to join up with TerraSave and is subsequently captured along with her fellow employees by an unidentified military force. After waking up on a seemingly deserted island, Claire and Moira find out they're part of some kind of experiment that involves, drumroll please, a virus that mutates people. The second part of each episode takes place 6 months after the fact and stars Barry, who's looking for Claire and his daughter, and a psychic little girl who mostly serves as a stand-in to give the Barry segments the same partner-based gameplay seen in Claire's. Revelation 2 delivers a decent attempt at storytelling and got me pretty interested in a couple of points. The switch from Claire and Moira's survival story to Barry's attempt to piece things together 6 months later makes for a compelling pace, but I think the overall execution falls flat. The episodic nature of the game may have kept players invested as they were waiting for each episode to release, but playing all the episodes as a whole feels disjointed. When I sit down to a video game, the last thing I want to see every 35 minutes is a slow fade to black and the words,
"Previously on Revelations 2.
That being said, this is still a really okay story, and the mystery of it was pretty good at drawing me in. I would recommend experiencing this story, if anything, to dissuade some of you supporters of the jump to episodic content in the FF7 remake. But factoring out this one big gripe, I would say the story does its job about as well as can be expected, and in modern gaming, that's not exactly the baseline.
Pedro!
Don't scare me like that, Claire!
You know, it wasn't that long ago that I went on and on about how the first Revelations was the perfect compromise between the old style of survival horror and the newer, more action-focused games. Well, I should have just kept my big mouth shut. Okay, so right out of the gate, let's get this out of the way. This is not a survival horror game, regardless of what Wikipedia would have you believe. The subtle, creepy elements that made Revelation such an atmospheric horror game are almost all absent here, and there are a lot of examples of this, but in the spirit of not ranting, here are a couple of the big ones. First off, there's a much larger emphasis on combat, and this means there's no shortage of ammo or healing items. Now the next one is a little more specific. The first Revelations mirrored that old RE style by bringing the camera in close and placing you in tight spaces. Revelations 2 has brought the camera back out but kept the tight, narrow halls and creepy structures. Now this is done to make combat easier, but it also makes the environment less of an unknown threat, and that is one of the more often overlooked aspects of survival horror. And now that your expectations are tempered a little bit, let's dive right in. The over-the-shoulder shooting in Rev 2 holds up well, and after a little hunting in the options menu, I was able to change the big, ugly aiming reticle into a much cooler, smaller laser sight. Movement, on the other hand, has been severely hindered since the last Revelations game. Handling your character feels sluggish, and taking corners feels like turning a Mack truck. Once you use the run button, this effect is magnified by 10, so eventually you'll figure out that dashing is almost useless. When combat gets a little too close for comfort, there is a dodge button, and for the most part, it works really well, but if you're like me, it'll take a couple of deaths to remind you that it's even there. My biggest complaint in the first game was the lack of variety in enemy types, and I'm pleased to say that Capcom has remedied this pretty well. There is a huge number of varied monsters this time around. With Claire, you'll see the Plaga-style infected, much like RE4, but as Barry, your main enemy types are some seriously awesome looking zombies. Like we're talking some nasty Lucio Fulci zombies here. Combat is spread out pretty well, and you're still being introduced to new monster types late into the game. Now, talking about the combat is all well and good, but it's actually only half of the story. Rev 2 is a cooperative experience, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it comes together surprisingly well. Both Claire and Barry have partners to lend a hand, and most of the help is of the non-combat variety. Most of the time, they serve a pretty vital service, like Natalia pointing out the locations of zombies using her telepathy. The team dynamic is well implemented, and each character plays off of each other in really cool ways. As I was nearing the end, I looked back in amazement when I realized I never felt like I was on an escort mission. In a single-player game, you can switch between the two characters, and this is incentivized by giving Mora and Natalia the ability to hunt for secret items and point them out. Switching between the two inventories and swapping items is a breeze, and when not being controlled, partner AI is actually really good. In a strictly gameplay sense, this is a big improvement to the gameplay found in Rev 1. I just wish it could have all been put into a survival horror game. The good news is there is a very good action horror game here. Those of you looking to fill that void left behind by the Dead Space series and fans of newer RE titles will probably love to see a lot of these changes. And at the end of the day, I have to judge this game based on what it is and not what I wish it was. And with that in mind, Revelations 2 does action horror gameplay almost perfectly. It's rare that a game's graphics makes me both happy and sad at the same time. On one hand, Rev 2 is easily the best looking title in the Resident Evil series, but on the other, I can't help but wish all of this dilapidated beauty and bleak good looks could have been put to work in a traditional zombie-filled Resident Evil title. But since we're not here to talk about what could have been, let's instead focus on how great this game looks. And it does look great. Environments are torn up and old looking, guns produce a real impact when they're fired, and all of this runs at a rock solid 60 frames per second. I really like the minimalist look in the game's inventory menus, and facial animations are handled well enough to lend the cutscenes a good amount of believability. All of the screen tearing and slowdown ridden aspects of Resident Evil 6 are thankfully not present here, and if I had to guess, I would wager that this means Rev 2 uses a completely different game engine. One thing that really feels like it was made just for me was the look of the zombies in Barry's campaign. Each walking corpse conjures up old memories of the grotesque looking zombies found in some of my favorite schlocky 80s movies, and that is something I really appreciated. Out of the small complaints I had with the graphics on display here, most are little gripes, and chief among them is the environments in the beginning of the game looking like something that you would see in a Saw movie. Sort of like they weren't making any attempts at hiding the fact that they wanted you to be scared, and in doing so they come off a little too eager and sort of shallow. Using the multiplayer feature, which by the way is super fun, forces you into the weirdest split screen I've ever seen. And I guess it makes sense seeing as these are two native 16:9 pictures trying to share a screen with each other, but just having these empty black portions of the screen present feels like a missed opportunity. Maybe the game's map or each character's inventory could have filled this space. This issue is of course solved by using the online multiplayer, and in the end the mere fact that a local multiplayer option was even included is a good enough sign to negate this fact. As far as current gen horror games go, I have yet to see the title that matches Rev 2 graphically, and that's saying a lot. There are a couple of cracks under the surface here, but a game looking this good when compared to its current gen peers is no easy task to achieve.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I was almost a Claire sandwich.
Ugh, does Barry tell everyone that story?
To be honest, I went into this game with some pretty low expectations, and I have no problem saying that I was pleasantly surprised. But the question is, can Revelations 2 fill that hole in your collection left by an industry-wide shift to a non-combat horror game style? Well, let's check out the pros and cons to find out. I know I'm going to sound like a wiener here, but let's just take a moment to appreciate the return of the living dead to a Resident Evil title. This is one really good-looking horror game, and it knows it. Nowadays, it's good to see a game not only include local and online cooperative multiplayer, but build the game around it in a very functional and immersive way. While this doesn't exactly further the RE universe, it still offers a nice and clean story that does a good job at using old characters and events. Plus, there's just something nice about being able to play through a story and get a concise beginning, middle, and end. While Rev 2 was an awesome experience, I was disappointed to find all of the survival horror elements found in the first entry had been thrown in the trash to make room for what I can only assume was a massive apology for Resident Evil 6. I know I just praised the inclusion of split screen, but it would have been nice if Capcom didn't just slap 2 video feeds on top of a black screen. Rev 2 keeps its predecessor's tight and claustrophobic environments, but decided to pull the camera back, which takes away from that creep factor the first game tried so hard to achieve. Okay, so I hate episodic games. Now, I'm not saying there aren't good episodic games, but does the episodic nature of these games add anything? The answer is no, and there's no reason a multi-million-dollar company like Capcom should have to resort to this format for an entry in one of their biggest money-making properties. I guess in the end, I'm stoked to see an action horror game that's this well made, but at the same time, I'm disappointed to see that Capcom has learned nothing from the original Revelations. It was clear that we all wanted more of the classic survival horror that creeped its way in there, but instead Capcom decided to use Rev 2 as a direct copy of all they tried to achieve in RE6. That being said, this is a really fun game that nails a perfect execution, so the question remains, should hardcore Resident Evil fans play this game? I would say definitely yes, just make sure you temper your expectations accordingly. Prepare yourself for an action-packed game with some creepy elements and not a full-on survival horror experience. Well guys, that's about all I have for now, so as usual, I'm Jared. And this has been Avalanche Reviews. Alright, thanks for checking out another episode, guys. If you liked what you saw here, well, there's a good chance you might get into my review of Extermination, or my list of top 5 features I would like to see return to the Resident Evil series. For you newcomers, why not click that subscribe button, and while you're feeling charitable, a quick like would be damn nice too. These are of course the terms of our deal. I put out the game reviews and you guys hit the like button. It's a perfect system with absolutely no flaws whatsoever.